right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our second, actually, it's our third on the record, but the second one with the police chief here, LeRonne L. Armstrong. Chief, thank you so much. We're going to talk about police reform. We're going to go right into it. We've seen you on a lot of different shows nationally, CNN, Fox News, talking about police reform. What exactly is police reform to you?
Well, it really is law enforcement examining its practices and looking at ways in which it can do things differently, to examine the impacts that law enforcement has had on community over many years, and looking at the way in which we've been policing in communities, better understanding what communities are experiencing on behalf of law enforcement, how we can reduce negative impacts on community, how we can reduce use of force on community, how we can police in a way that's constitutional, that's just, that's fair, a way in which people respect, where people feel like it's legitimate, that they can trust the decisions that are being made by law enforcement, and then taking progressive actions about change. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean when you say change? Well, change is the acceptance of community oversight, like in Oakland with the police commission, but not just allowing it to be police commission in name, but a department that is willing to work collaboratively with the police commission to come up with progressive policies. How can we have a better policy around use of force? How can we have better policy around who we decide to search when it comes to probation and parole people? I mean, so there's so many things that we can do as a department to begin that reform effort, and I'm proud to say that these things are being done in the Oakland Police Department.
Is reform needed? I know that's kind of an interesting question, but some people say, a lot is needed, and some people say not so much. I know we're looking at needed nationwide, there's a lot, but OPD is a little bit progressive in some areas. So I gave you two questions there. First, can you tell me, is it needed? And then also how OPD is leading the way already, if they are.
Yeah, it's clearly needed. When you look at all of the incidents that have gotten national attention, the killing of people when they've come in contact with law enforcement, we all have concerns. I have serious concerns about things that I've seen. It really says to me as a law enforcement leader that de-escalation is so important, that people survive interactions with law enforcement. And some of the responsibility is law enforcement. How do we train our officers to better manage these situations? How do we recognize that a gun and badge may not be the right response to everything? How do we become open to new alternative responses to certain calls? How do we accept the challenges that come with dealing with those that suffer from mental illness and figuring out, is there a more appropriate response for those calls so that they don't escalate to the point where force has to occur? So I think it's just this openness. Law enforcement has been such an insular institution for so long that it is time to let community in the room. It's time to hear what people have to say. It's time to hear their perspective. It's always interesting that when those that don't that enforce the law sometimes don't understand the other side of those who are impacted by their enforcement actions. And so I think this is a call across the country for law enforcement to now listen to community.
Let me step in real quick. You said something about sometimes the gun and a badge are not always needed. And I know that's one thing a lot of people with the reimagining groups are talking about that. So what do you mean by that? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are happy to hear you say that the gun and badge isn't always needed. What does that mean?
It means that there are certain incidents that occur where law enforcement could escalate those events, right? That the outcome may not be what all of us desire, which is for the person to get the support and the resources and services that they need. But when we come as police officers, we're very limited in what we can offer to someone, particularly someone that is suffering from a mental illness. But if you were to bring any other response to a call like that, you can almost rest assured that it wouldn't end with somebody potentially losing their life, right? Obviously, there are calls with those that suffer from mental illness that have violence connected to it where law enforcement must respond because it's not safe for any other alternative to respond. But when that's not the case, the question is, what is the best response to get people the support and service that they need? And that may not be law enforcement.
Let me ask you this and let everyone know that we do not have scripted questions. Some people may think that, but these are actually an interview conversation I'm having with the chief. Chief, talk to me about that. I want to go more into what you were saying about not always having a badge and a gun always appear for those incidents. right now OPD is tasked with that. And from what I'm hearing from you, you would like to allow others to take that responsibility. But until that happens,
yeah, I think it's about having the right response, and when that response is prepared to be dispatched to actually handle the call. And so in Oakland, our macro program, I just met with the fire department actually prior to this interview, and we're talking about macro. We're talking about helping to establish macro and get it out into the community as soon as possible, allowing community to respond to these calls and be able to provide support and services, allowing law enforcement to focus in on violent crime, focus on the most serious crime that we see happening in our community. And so I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of any response that leads to a safe outcome. We want no one to get hurt. I don't want community members to get hurt. I don't want officers to get hurt. I don't want their safety to be compromised either. I think what my call is, it's about the right response.
In police reform, a lot of people are saying that, well, actually, let me go back to an incident you guys had yesterday where working together with the community with a family member helped bring to a peaceful ending of an incident. Are those the kind of situations we're looking at it in or not? Because let me explain to the public that was an incident where someone had a weapon in their car at the same time. So is that something that law enforcement should go to or should not go to, or what's your thoughts there?
Well, I think in that instance, I think again, it shows how important it is for law enforcement to be open to community helping us resolve situations safely. So for so many years when law enforcement was handling critical incidents, we wouldn't be very open to hearing community say, can I help you with that? Or can we call this individual's mother to the scene and see if she can help you resolve this issue by getting her son to safely surrender, where law enforcement wouldn't have to use force and potentially injure or hurt the individual or expose law enforcement to potential injury. So in that instance yesterday, when a mother shows up to a scene and she says, law enforcement, let me help you resolve this by talking to my son. And law enforcement is open to that, and they say, yes, ma'am, we welcome you. And we allow her to talk to her son yesterday, and she was able to de-escalate the situation and get him to safely surrender. That is the outcome that we want to get to. And so community can play a key role in resolving these incidents, but we have to be open as law enforcement to see what role they can play. And yesterday's event, I appreciate our officers being open and willing to let the mother step in and be a help, because this young man obviously was in a situation where law enforcement is going to have to encounter him. But the question was, how do we do it? And we do it. The overall objective is to recover the firearm and safely resolve the incident. And that happened, but it happened because of the help of his family.
Now, we've heard the word police reform in the past. Has there been much reform since you started 20 plus years ago? And then my next question is, what have you done since you've been in that chair to make sure and continue the reform? So first, how was it 20 plus years ago when you started?
Yeah, well, it was a long time ago, first of all. The second thing I'll say is that, so much has changed over those 20 years. I think, the first thing I'll say is that there were no body-worn cameras, right? And so, I think the evolution of body-worn cameras and cameras as a whole, and being able to see what's happening in our community, to better understand what community has experienced, has, I think, been something that has been eye-opening to all of us. And it has led to this call for change in law enforcement. And so I think that is one of those unique tools that I think helps people feel like law enforcement has the opportunity to be transparent and actually show people what happened during a given incident and take responsibility and hold people accountable to their actions. So I think that's important. I think improvement in policies. I think the ability to look at the way in which we, use force and examine the best ways that we can do that. But really, de-escalation, evolving to the point where the outcome for an incident is rooted in de-escalation. And one of the things I've done since I've joined the police department has really been somebody that has been a champion for reform. And as I've sat in this seat, I've been a champion for de-escalation. And so within my department, I've helped to purchase new technology to help improve the training that our officers are receiving. We have a new virtual system that we spent several hundreds of thousands of dollars to purchase.
Real quick, Chief, explain what de-escalation means.
De-escalation essentially means that officers are trying to minimize the use of force. They're trying to reduce the need to use force. They're trying to resolve situations with the least force needed, right? And so that starts with how you talk to people. Right. The first thing we're doing as officers is trying to communicate clear commands with people and getting people to understand what we're asking them to do and trying to ask for their compliance. And when they do that, that resolves situations at the lowest stage. But then when it comes to a situation where force is used, force is never pretty, and we never want to have to engage in force. But when it's necessary, how do you, once you achieve compliance, how do you dial that back? How do you begin to de-escalate and step back and reduce that force as you get compliance? Make sure you don't hurt people. Make sure that the force is proportional to the resistance that you're facing. Right? How do you begin to understand how to get medical treatment to people if they're hurt or injured? How do you shift from someone that is using force to actually being somebody that is providing first aid? Now, because we want to help people. We don't want to hurt people. We want to help people as soon as we can. And so I think all of those things are incorporated in our de-escalation training, and all of our emphasis in this organization is how can we resolve situations with the least amount of force necessary to get the compliance that we need.
And then you were talking about the Virtua. Explain what Virtua is and go back into that.
Yeah, Virtua is a video technology that we use to take our officers through exercises to simulate what they might experience in the community, what they might see in terms of encountering individuals, encountering weapons. When you introduce stress to officers in the training environment, it makes them more comfortable when it's happening in the real environment. So you want to make mistakes in the virtual environment so that when you get out on the street, those repetitions help you make good decisions, make you more comfortable when you find yourself under stress, making sure you follow policy, making sure you're following your training, making sure that you understand what is the appropriate approach to whatever situation that you're managing. And so sometimes as police officers, if you don't have this level of training, sometimes you can be surprised at what you're encountering. We want to take away the surprise, and we want to introduce officers to as many scenarios as we can, put them under stress, and let them make those decisions, make good decisions, and then help them understand what was the appropriate decision that they should have made. And I think that helps to reduce stress in the community when they're out there making those decisions in a split second. Things happen really quickly in the real world, right? Split second decisions that officers have to make. But you can also manage that stress through training.
And you said de-escalation can be something as simple as how you talk to someone. Explain.
Well, what we talk about is procedural justice. We train each officer in procedural justice in this police department. And really what it means is that officers' tone, officers' body language, all of those things could either escalate or de-escalate a situation. Is the officer calm? Is the officer respectful? Is the officer professional? Is the officer making himself human to the person that he's interacting with? Is the officer sharing, hey, my name is Officer Armstrong. How can I help you? Hey, here's what I need you to do, right? Giving clear direction to someone, letting them know exactly what it is that you need to do. And I think things like that, I think help reduce the likelihood that there'll be an force encounter because it's clear, because the officer is respectful, the officer is treating the person with dignity. And so those are things that we're training in procedural justice. That treatment is valuable. People oftentimes talk about the treatment that they had with law enforcement more than they talk about the outcome. Whether they got a ticket or whether they went to jail, that doesn't matter as much as if the officer was disrespectful, the officer was unprofessional, the officer dehumanized me by the way he treated me, the way he talked to me, the way he looked at me. So all of those things matter, and we train our officers to understand that those things matter. Those things, it can either escalate things or it can de-escalate a situation.
Is it working here in Oakland?
We see the data supports that it's working. I mean, when you look at the current statistics that are coming out nationally, that the Oakland Police Department has the lowest officer-involved shooting rates of any department in the country per arrest, it really shows that the de-escalation training is working. When you say that our officers are recovering a record number of firearms this year, it's that without actually being engaged in an officer-involved shooting, says that it's working. Officers are doing things safely, they're doing things in a manner that reduces harm to our community, and that's what we want to see.
How does it work for your officers? Is it something that they look forward to? Is it something that just give them another opportunity? I do remember one thing that I would talk about people, that you can't learn the city of Oakland in 6 months through an academy. But this continued opportunities for learning, is that working, and how are the officers responding? Is there a little bit of pushback or anything like that?
No, I think our officers, from the minute they walk in the door, we're having the conversations about what we want to see in them. Right? We want to see officers that practice de-escalation. We want officers that are professional. We want officers that respect our community. We want officers that want to engage with community. As someone that's born and raised in Oakland, I think my reputation is clear that I'm going to have a relationship with the community, that I love being from Oakland, I love living in Oakland, and I encourage my officers to get to know Oaklanders. So whether you are from Oakland or not, if you're a member of this police department, you're expected to get to know the community in which you work in. Become a part of the community. Get to let people get to know you as a person, not just as a police officer. This is just a job, right? We are all human beings going out there doing the best we can every day. And people will respect you and appreciate you more when they know why you do the job and who you are as a person.
All right, we have some people talking about a couple items on here. I want to get to them. Someone's clapping in agreement with your saying, and they're saying simulated events. Some saying, is it a video game? Is it I guess the incident, the scenario you were talking about? Explain to them what that is.
Yeah, it is a video simulator. It simulates hundreds of scenarios. We can dictate the outcome of the scenario. So we can put a weapon in the person's hands. We can take a weapon out the person's hands. We can make the situation resolved through verbal communication. We can make them use a certain force option to see if the officer is making the right choice and what force option they use. We can look at the officer's report writing after they finish the incident to make sure that they document and articulate why they use that force. Because that's important to make officers understand when you choose a certain force option, you need to clearly understand why. Why did you choose that force option, and what outcome were you seeking? So that's the training that we're providing them. This technology helps us do that. It allows our training staff to stand by and work directly with the officer, isolating things that they need improvement, areas that they need improvement on, and immediately start working on those areas with them, giving them new scenarios. It also actually allows us to use buildings within our own city. It allows us to use City Hall as a backdrop, Lake Merritt as a backdrop, the PAB as a backdrop, so that we can have some realistic scenarios that look like the areas that they are likely to be policing in.
Is this something that officers are required to do, and is it also something that goes beyond the academy?
Yes. All officers are required. They are mandated now to take 10 hours of training. That training, 4 hours of that training include virtual training. So that is once a year, 4 hours of virtual training. Then they get another 2 hours during another qualification training that they have to go through. So several hours of virtual training, and their supervisors can always request for them to have additional virtual training if they identify some deficiencies in the field.
Okay, and let's go back more to police reform. So you talked about bringing in the virtual. What else are you doing?
One of the things that I'm doing is changing policy around use of force, right? So one of the things you'll see is that my work with the Oakland Police Commission brought out what they call the most progressive use of force policy in the country. It was one that included all of the requirements of 8 Can't Wait, which was a push through after the George Floyd murder to require departments to practice 8 Can't Wait, which includes mandates to mandated reporting, mandates to intervene, officers needing to no longer practice the carotid hold, officers to have policies that don't require officers to not use tactics that might cause positional asphyxia. So all of these things have been implemented within the Oakland Police Department and within their training. It's also also a part of reform is investigating complaints. It really is having a robust citizen complaint reporting system that allows people, when they have a bad incident with law enforcement, or one that they feel like the officer may have behaved in a way that wasn't appropriate, that there's multiple channels to report that. I think our CPRA, which is with our investigative body of our police commission, our community policing review agency, they investigate complaints independently. I think that's important that you have that independent group to look at complaints. Sometimes people don't trust law enforcement, and that's understandable. And so they need to have an alternative to always come into law enforcement. I think CPRA plays a great role.
Are there challenges going on dealing with that with the public? Because there are some people in the public that are going to push back against officers and not wanting to comply with officers or just give the officers a hard time. Has that come up as a problem? Has that come up with an issue?
I think it's important for people to know that the vast majority of officers come in every day and do a phenomenal job. They go out and they put themselves at harm's way. They sacrifice their safety for others every day, particularly in the city of Oakland, where we experience shootings and homicides and lots of violent crime. Officers are always putting themselves at risk, and they do a good job. And so I think sometimes, when community, expresses that they don't like the police, that they don't appreciate what they do, I think that affects law enforcement. So I always say to people that we want to hear your voice, but we want it to be a two-way street, that we want to have a conversation, because it's all about coming, from my perspective, coming up with solutions that improve the service that we provide to the community. So I just encourage people to not take a stance of I don't like the police and I don't want to deal with police. I say take the stance of I want to come up with solutions to help improve police. And that's what I bring. I bring an openness and a willingness to hear people and to incorporate things that people bring forward. In yesterday's incident, I heard directly from someone from community about, hey, this individual's mother is here. Can you let him talk to his mother? She can be helpful. And I immediately called my staff and said, hey, let the mom talk to him. That's the ability to listen to people. We all want the best outcome. We want people to get through these incidents safely. We want officers to be able to take action safely, and we want to be able to resolve these things with the minimal use of force.
A question again about the virtual. You said they go for 10 hours or separate 2 or 6 hours, I think you said, like something like that, and they always can go for more. Person asking what happens when, or I should say if, they fail, still out in the field until they get it right, or coaching along the way?
Both, right? It depends on how egregious the failure is. We don't want to put anybody out there that can't make good decisions. That's why we have our subject matter experts there providing the training from our training staff. They are examining the officer's decision making, and if there was something that they identified that was truly problematic, they would report that up to our chain of command. But we always encourage our supervisors and commanders to monitor officers' decision on an ongoing basis, right? We always examine it or investigate the actions of our officers. When they use force, there's a force investigation to determine if the force was in compliance with the law, in compliance with policy. So we're always examining our officers' action and determining what is the best outcome. Is it additional training, which would mean we might send you to virtual.
Other items that you're looking forward to in the future to dealing with the reform. I believe Oakland is leading the way in a lot of places than other areas. How so?
I believe that we have what we call the most robust risk management system in the country. We just worked with a group named Slalom. They created slalom dashboards that allow us to look at our officers' performance, to determine if officers' performance show any potential risk, right? Is an officer an outlier for the number of complaints that he or she has had, community complaints that they've received? Has this officer engaged in multiple force encounters much higher than their peers? Has this officer engaged in a number of pursuits that may not have been in compliance with policy? So we're constantly examining risk, and I think we're doing it in a way that nobody else is doing. Our dashboards give us real-time data, allowing our supervisors and commanders to intervene as soon as possible. When we recognize an officer is not going out doing their jobs in line with policy or practice, it allows us to quickly bring that officer in and redirect that officer, give him additional training. If necessary, maybe take him out of his assignment till we get him up to standard, right? He or she up to standard. And so this risk management system is saying that we want to continue to look at our officers' actions to ensure it's within our policies and within our practices, and try to make sure that we are always examining what impact they're having on the community.
Obviously, the Oakland Police Department is doing something right, and I would talk back to what I said in the very beginning. You got the national eyes on you, always talking to you, always asking you about that. Why do you think that's happening right now?
Well, I think people are recognizing the great work that's being done. When you see disparities in stops going down, when you see our footprint in stops reducing 60% in a 5-year period. Right? When you see us hearing the voices of community saying you guys shouldn't be making traffic stops for low-level traffic offenses, and we are implementing policies to say that we don't prioritize those type of equipment stops, that we want our officers to be focused on traffic safety stops, things that improve safety in the community. I think the police department in Oakland is willing to take on different challenges, look at things in a progressive way, try to improve. Any police department in the country has to make sure that they understand the values of their community. I'm from this community. I understand the values of the community. And that's what I bring into my seat every day, is figuring out how as a department can we improve the way we police in the city of Oakland and make sure our values are aligned with the community's values.
All right, Chief, I'm going to let you wrap it up. We're almost right here on the end of the time there. Is there anything else that you would like to say or add to the people about police reform or anything right now that's on your heart?
Well, I just want people to know that in this moment where we've seen increases in violent crime, where we've seen increases in shootings, where we see calls for police reform, where we see calls for defunding law enforcement, I just want people to know that the commitment from the Oakland Police Department is continue to do the best job we can, to continue to try to address violent crime in our community, continue to try to work with other partners to address crime, that it is not just the Oakland Police Department, it is our Department of Violence Prevention, it's our community partners, it is our street outreach teams, our interrupters, it's all of us trying to deal with this together in a collaborative way. And so I don't think it's about pointing fingers as we see crime go up. I think it's about coming together and coming up with solutions to keep this community safe. We don't want any more people to lose their lives. And I think all of us have that shared goal. And so I think we all want to live in a safe city. We all want Oakland to be the shine and be the beautiful city that we all like. We all want to go to the lake and feel feel community, feel a sense of unity together in a safe space. And so, but that's going to take all of us working together. And so you have my commitment. So I just hope that everybody will come together and work towards a safe Oakland.
All right, Chief, thank you so much. That's all with the Chief tonight. We'll see him again next month, but next week, next Wednesday, we'll talk to the Criminal Investigations Division's Deputy Chief and the Captain to talk about investigations going on there. Hopefully we'll see you guys next week.